So let's now take a look at one of the greatest things of CSS, and that is Flexbox. So Flexbox is basically a set of related CSS properties that we can use to create some simple layouts. So what do I actually mean by layouts? Well, a layout is basically that we place elements wherever we want them to be on the page. So right now, everything here is simply one after another. So we have this image, then next we have this text, next we have this button, and so everything just comes one after another. However, that's not really what we have here, for example. So here we have everything nicely laid out. So here on this left side, we have the image and the text, which basically counts as the logo. And then on the other side of the same line, we have this button, right? Then below that, we have this entire part where again, we have some kind of simple layout. So we have these buttons on the left and this list on the right. So again, this is basically a layout because we were able to place everything exactly where we wanted it to be. And so let's now do that with Flexbox. And we will start here actually with this top part. So we will start with the header basically. And so as always, it's always a good idea, at least when we are still learning, to give things some background color to see what's going on. And we're using our friend red again here. So we basically want this part here to be on one side and this button on the other side, right? Let's check that out in our HTML before we start doing anything. So inside the header, we have the image, the H1, and the button, right? And remember that we basically count this one here as a logo. It's all on one side, and then we have this one on the other side. So before we start doing anything, let's actually put these two together in a box and call it a logo, basically. So let's use the generic box of a div, which you will find is the most used CSS box, basically, of all. It just doesn't have any meaning, but these other ones like header, form, and main, they're mostly for the big layout parts. But when we just need a small box like this, we usually reach for a div. Okay, so we called that logo here, see? And then I'm cutting these two and placing them in there. And for now, you see that doesn't change anything, but it will in a second when we use Flexbox. So notice how right now in the header we have two elements. We have this div and we have this button. And one is here and the button is right after it. So now we will change that with Flexbox. So the way we activate basically Flexbox on this container is by saying display and set it to flex. And immediately you see that something changed here. So first of all, let's give these things some names so that we are all talking about the same thing. So the header here, which is this element with the red background, is the so-called flex container, because that's where we added display set to flex. And then all of the direct children, so in this case, that's this div and this button, are the flex items. And so you see that now the flex items, they are side by side like this, which is already great. But now, of course, we need to take it a bit further. So Flexbox gives us tools to basically vertically and horizontally align items. And let's start with vertically, where we use the align items property. Align items. And here we can now use a lot of different properties. And again, VS Code is really helpful because it is showing us all these different options. So the most used one by far is the center. So what this means is that this element is now centered vertically with this one, which before we had Flexbox in CSS was really, really difficult. And now it simply takes 2 lines of code. So that's just really amazing. So let me inspect this here just so you see. So again, we have the two flex items, this one and this one. And so again, they're now vertically centered with one another. And just so we see it even a bit better, let's also add some background color here to the logo. So remember, we gave it the class logo. And let's simply use blue here. Okay, maybe some padding here. And again, this is all just we see a bit better what is actually going on. Okay, so hopefully that's what you expected. So again, we have our two flex items inside of the flex container, which are now already vertically aligned. But it could be also aligned to the top, for example. Then we would use flex start, which sometimes is also very helpful, or flex end, like this, or even the default, which was stretch. So this is what we had at the very beginning, where this button was suddenly the size of this other element. So it was stretched to occupy the entire flex container. Okay, but anyway, what we want here is align them to the center. Okay, so that is vertical alignment. And now we can also align it horizontally. Well, technically in Flexbox, it's not called horizontally and vertically because we can even change the alignment direction. But here we're not going to do that. We will just keep it very simple. Just know that there is a lot more to Flexbox than what you will learn here. But again, if you're curious about that, you can then check out my special HTML and CSS course. But anyway, let's now talk about the horizontal alignment. And for that, we use justify content. So those names, they are maybe a little bit confusing and difficult to memorize, but with use, you will get there. So we can use again center, and then that will basically take this entire block here and center it horizontally. Okay. Then we can also align everything to the right, which would be again flex end, and of course to the left, which is the default of flex start. So these are the most basic ones, but now there's also some special ones. And the most special one is called space between. So what do you think is going to happen now? Well, let's see. And there it is. So what space between does is to basically take all the empty space that is remaining in the container and then place it between the items in an even way. So right now we cannot really see that. So we cannot see that it's really so even. But if we added another button here, let's just copy this. Actually, we can copy paste it a couple of times and just put any content here. And so you see that they now have the same space between all of them. And so again, that is exactly what space between does. So it gives the same space between all the different flex items. And this is really extremely helpful for things like doing page navigations or stuff like that. And it's also very helpful when we only have two elements and we basically want to push each to one side. And so that's exactly what we have here. So what we have here. So we have this entire box, the entire heading, and then we have one thing on the left and the other on the right. And so that's when justify content space between comes in really, really handy. So let's delete these ones we don't need. And then let's go back here. And actually that's already it for the header. Okay. And now just to practice, basically let's do the same thing on the logo. So in the logo, remember, we have two things. We have this image and we have the text, which is an H1 element, which means that it will always create a new line. That's why it's not beside this image. But we want it to be besides the image. And so we can again use Flexbox. So we say display flex. And so they are now automatically side by side. However, the vertical alignment is not really correct. And so let's fix that with, again, align items and set it to center. Okay, so that's a bit better, but it's still not 100% vertically centered. But that's only because of that issue that I told you before, which is that this font family has some weird spacing on the bottom. So that's why here in the last lecture when we did this, we didn't create any space on the bottom, I believe. So where is it? Ah, here. So if we give it some background color, again, using that tool, then you will see, actually it has a lot of space. So it has some on the top and some off the bottom. And yellow is just really hurting my eyes right now. So let's try some purple, something like that. Yeah, that's better. So it's still occupying a lot of space. And one way in which we can fix that is well, this is also a new property we didn't talk about before. Or maybe we did. I think we actually did. So let's just set it here to 1 in this case. And so now you see that it's no longer taking up any space on the top, but still here at the bottom. So this we cannot fix, and this is basically some mistake with the font itself. So in order to just really center it vertically, we can just create some hack here basically and add some margin to the top. So basically to move it down a little bit. Okay, get rid of the background color here. And so now that looks quite nice. Maybe a little bit more, 6 pixels. And yeah, now that's vertically centered as well. Okay, now there's just one thing left, which is that here the text is really glued to the image, right? We would really like to have some space here. So how do you think we could achieve that? Well, we could do it in multiple ways. So we could add some margin right to this image. And so that would then create some empty space on the right side, right? That would be one option. We could also set some margin on the left on this H1. So that would then create some margin there. Let me just show you that. Margin right, 20 pixels. And actually that doesn't really work here. Well, actually it did. So here they are, the 20 pixels, but I wanted the left, of course. So I wanted margin left, and so that's working fine. So this would work, but there is a better approach. So the better approach is to use Flexbox again, because on the Flex container, which remember in this case is logo, we can create or we can define a gap property. And gap will do exactly what you think it does, which is to create a gap between all the Flex items. So even if we had multiple of them, there would now always be this gap of 16 pixels. So this is really, really helpful again. And with this, we are actually done with the header. So that's looking really great, and all with a few lines of Flexbox CSS, basically. So yeah, a few years ago, we didn't have Flexbox, and it was really, really a pain to do these kinds of things. But now it's just really, really straightforward. You just need to practice this a little bit, and then even using Flexbox will become second nature. And now let's just get rid of all the things that we did to visualize Flexbox. So that's this padding in the header, this background here, and also this background. Give it a save, and there you go. So this is already looking exactly the same as here. It's just smaller here because we zoomed out the page. Beautiful. So this is looking great. And now in the next lecture, we will use some more Flexbox to format these facts, because this, of course, also isn't looking yet as we want it to look. And so we will again use Flexbox, but first, let's take a break.